There are actually close to 2 billion people on the planet. They don't have access to the banking system. They're still using cash. They're still trading with each other. It's just that they're not connecting in a global scale. It means that they can't send money on a distance. That's just one simple use case. If you apply it to many different models out there, one of the biggest one that blockchain people really refer to, which is the Metcalfe's law, that tells you that the power of the system is quadratically correlated to the number of people involved in it. And then they like to apply it to what would happen if we could get those 2 billion people that are right now excluded and include them into this global ecosystem.
Hello, this is Derek Bernard, producer of the HackerNoon podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Today I sit down with Anton Mozgovoy, former VP of Technology at Humaniq. We discuss his prior project in which the blockchain was utilized and a coin created to bring financial power to the Unbanked in Africa. At its peak, they were 500,000 members strong. We also get a bit into the challenges facing the growing generational divide being accelerated by the pace of advancing technology, as well as the global forces at play in the technology space. Oh, and if you're new to the podcast and are tech savvy or part of the tech-interested crowd, we have a lot of great content, so be sure to subscribe, like, and comment to join the conversation. Here comes Anton. HackerNoon, an independent tech media destination for tech professionals and the tech interested, released its new publishing platform at HackerNoon.com. Anyone can now visit HackerNoon.com, start writing, and have their post reviewed and improved by a professional editor for distribution via HackerNoon. Head over to HackerNoon.com, resist the urge to dive into all the great content, then click Get Started to create a free account and start writing. You're just a few clicks away from becoming a contributing author. See you soon at HackerNoon.com. Okay, so then let's see. Interesting blockchain projects that have come out right around the summertime. And it kind of makes sense that there would be a lot of blockchain projects happening, right? It just, I guess now it seems like there have been more in a surprising way for you.
Yes, absolutely. So, obviously when it was like a huge wave of the ICOs and then the follow-up wave of people just trying to get, on the bandwagon there. And I'd say it was just happening up until sometime mid-2018. And then there was like a downtime. And then we saw like all of these huge exchanges starting doing the STOs, and then they started doing the IEOs, right? So like exchange offerings. And then we started seeing obviously, people trying to test the water again because everybody needs money, right? To full scale projects. And then we saw like how the older projects, I would say, start falling when they, finally got run of the money. So then that's when things got really, really quiet. But then I started seeing that there would be like really, really passionate teams working on projects without any funding. And they would be like bootstrapping, or they would have any savings. So they just, do really, really small investor rounds. So like, whether it be seed or pre-seed. And then you can see those projects are actually finally delivering what they've been telling about, or what they actually promised to deliver. So that's what I believe is actually changing. And it's quite interesting that the timing kind of aligns throughout different projects. Why? Because I think because I've been involved a lot with Ethereum chain specifically. I've done quite a few projects, and one of my previous big project, Humaniq, was really, really tied into the Ethereum ecosystem. You could see how people got tired of waiting for Ethereum 2.0, and then how people started asking themselves more questions around whether they actually need Ethereum 2.0, this long anticipated brand new chain. And then what are the businesses that have been trying the water, right, with Ethereum, whether they would actually ever switch or would even try it. So, different people like trying to work on projects that would try to connect the chains. Would it be atomic swaps? Would it be, the liquidity pools from different chains? Would it be just basically anything that would try to connect the different chains out there? And that's where I see the majority of the work happening. And it's quite interesting that I would say the lead, as a lead investor or as a lead big brother out there watching for this project is actually not an enterprise alliance or not even a foundation. It's actually an exchange. And in this case, it's Binance, which is leading the majority of the rounds for, these kind of new upcoming projects.
And so you mentioned Humaniq, and that's the project you've been working on, and you've created your own coin, and you've started it in Africa, right? To create a marketplace for the unbanked to have at least some sort of banking power where they can do what they need, I suppose, in terms of finance.
Correct. So people always been asking, like, why do you even need, yet another coin? But then when you started looking into let's say, the distribution of ETH, right, or Bitcoin, you would see that the majority of ETH or Bitcoin wasn't mined in Africa. So ultimately, the cost of getting, the Bitcoins, let's say, in Africa would be much higher. In fact, at the end of the 2017, because you remember, when the prices were at their all-time max, all around the world, people were buying Bitcoin for like around $19,000, $20,000. And exchanges in countries like Zimbabwe, which suffer from, the hyperinflation, the Bitcoin on local exchanges was worth around $35,000, $40,000, which is, 2 times the normal price. And that's ultimately why, because there's not enough liquidity out there. The idea is that how can we actually bring in the liquidity, right, without actually going with bags of cash, in all of these countries. So that's why we started working on a technical solution, on a cheap one that would be able to scale and that would be able to quickly deploy in every different, I would say, not just simple geolocation, but also legal framework location.
Okay, and how's it been?
It's been with, I would say, both successes and failures. Obviously, if the problem exists ever since we remember ourselves, and not even big organizations can solve it, like World Bank, Visa, MasterCard, you can always argue whether they want to solve it. But ultimately, we wouldn't be even talking about this issue if it would have been resolved. I would say the all-time max that Humaniq has had, we had a bit more than 500,000 users. So we did get like lots of awards. We did like do lots of the things. But I would say one of the biggest challenges that the project has always had is ultimately trying to be self-sustainable, so generate enough revenue and also be socially focused, because ultimately it's not yet another banking infrastructure or even a microfinance or an alternative financing system. So it's always been hard to find that balance, and we've been experimenting a lot. So the project is still operating and working, but I would say it's one of those innovative models which others adopted and evolved. And there are now a lot of the different projects that are working in the same sphere. I would call it blockchain for social good project, because ultimately it's trying to leverage technology for something a bit bigger than the revenue.
Yeah, to me, that sort of caught my attention immediately. I think one of your articles was for the social good, and then also the marketplace that you talk about, where you have the philosophy behind it, and then also the technical components of it. And one thing that I thought was interesting was horizontally scaling.
Yeah, which also again connects to the philosophy that we are having, is how can you build a system that would be again cheap and that would be scalable and that would actually work. So that's how we were selecting pretty much every single component on the system. So from the settlement engine, right, or the transaction engine. So how do you actually make the transactions between the users, right? So when we're talking about the money or information, so there's been a bunch of choices out there. So we went into crypto full node and obviously Ethereum. So as described earlier, which sounded as the best option at the time. But ultimately, as we started growing, the Ethereum started growing as well, like really, really rapidly. It was getting closer to the end of the 2017. And that's ultimately when we started experiencing, I would say, not the commission problems, but ultimately the unit economics problems. Why? Because when we were launching the system, we even encountered that the average, I would say, commission price for the transaction on Ethereum mainnet was around $1. And as we started working and as we started growing, and as Ethereum started kind of exploding with activity, the transaction fees went up to like 50 cent all-time high. So that's like 50 times the price that we've calculated for, or our own chain. So that's what one of the good things that EVM allows you to, is different scaling solutions. And one of the things that we went for is sort of a hybrid model. So it's something where you still connect to Ethereum mainnet for the liquidity for your token, and then for the operations on the outside world, outside of your ecosystem. And also you are able to still maintain decentralized, up to an extent, network within your reach. So our hybrid solution is ultimately a bunch of permissioned blockchains, which are tied on a software layer. So ultimately it is a software that actually controls where the transaction should happen, and if the transaction should happen between the different blockchains, what's happening in those blockchains specifically. So whether you need to burn tokens in one or mint tokens in another one, just to make sure that the overall net balance remains intact. And ultimately, if there's one one simple sentence to describe the approach that we took is the Pareto's principle. So trying to get 80% of the result with 20% of effort, because in our case, time and agility were the most critical components of how we can scale fast, especially with all of the race between the different blockchain projects. And actually, quite high demand from the community of the users, right, that are expecting something new, and it works.
And that's interesting to me. Like the whole thing is kind of interesting to me, especially that you went into Africa and you're sort of bringing liberation to a certain number of people in a way. I mean, I would imagine that the economies that you're going into are in a kind of disarray because which is why the solution is needed. And so it reminds me of this story I read actually on HackerNoon about a Venezuelan who had gotten into cryptocurrency or Bitcoin before it really became a thing. And he was able to escape the tumult that existed in his country. And so it raises the question for me if we're going to emancipate these people from their countries, it seems like the countries or the governments wouldn't want that to happen. And then we would get immediate pushback anytime that was threatened in a real way.
I think that's already happening. I mean, just look at the very, very recent example, Libra from Facebook. You can have, very different attitude towards, Facebook. You can like it, you can hate it because of like what it's doing. But ultimately, they were the first big, like really big organization that tried, I would say, massive project on scale. And you can see that many different governments got afraid really, really fast. And you can see how that escalated really fast from announcing Libra when it's going to, be on board, onboarded, when things are going to start, and then all of this first validators, right, of their nodes, are going to participate, and then within weeks, it all like got frozen. So you could see that the state of changes is obviously very frightening. And the reason why it is frightening is because it changes the status quo. And ultimately, I would say the biggest task that we have is not even to try to change that status quo, but it is to say we can change it. And ultimately, it's not one project. I believe, there's this thing, right? So power law distribution. So at any market you would look at, there's going to be like 1, 2, maximum 3 companies that dominate the market. And then, there's a tail of like everything else. You can look at everywhere around the technology, not even technology, like pretty much any market. And the point here is that it could be like, company A or company B, but if somebody starts something, it creates this opportunity for others to join. And the same thing with the blockchain for social inclusion or, this entire social impact. We saw an opportunity in this technology, and there were like many others that started their companies. I could name, a bunch of them that started after, let's say, Humaniq, but they've also achieved like tremendous results. And I would say that it's a common or, it's a shared win, because the more people get attracted with this idea, the more people try something, the better ultimate solution is going to be. It could take a couple of iterations, maybe a couple of even generations of products before we'll get that one product that will actually work and work on a scale. Ultimately, like it or not, it will change. It was actually shocking to me. And then in a few countries in Africa that I've been, if you would ask people, all right, so where's the post where I can send the postcard? And then they're going to be like, a post, like if you need to send a postcard, send it through like Facebook or WhatsApp. Like, why do you even need a post? There's a completely different, generation of people that think on a different level. Because, the time when I was like growing up, and it wasn't like, a long while ago, but I remember like, why do you need a post? And then, why it works. And then we know a very big business that kind of lives off, the post, right? So Amazon. But, there's an entire digital generation that would expect completely different level of services.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the generation gap. It was so well exemplified, that gap, in the United States when Congress was talking to Mark Zuckerberg. And they just they just didn't know like anything really. And it's not that the elders, I think, in terms of that generation are not wise, and in terms of making decisions, there you could argue corruption and yada, yada. But I think there's a lot of people who are trying for good. But it's at the same time, they're just not savvy enough to, I feel, make certain decisions around the technology. So it's how do we do this generational handshake where the younger generation is listened to in these terms, and how do we take a direction from here? I guess we're kind of doing it. Capitalism seems to be breeding a whole bunch of different products and everything, right? But at the same time, I've read places where they said it should be banned or it will be banned. And so it's like, well, we have a fight on our hands as opposed to, it could be somehow we could all work together to bring it into a reality. How do we make the vision of that reality palatable for an older generation that doesn't get it?
I think that's $1 million question. And to be honest, I don't know the answer to it. Speaking from my experience, let's say when I introduced the concept of crypto to my grandparents, I obviously had to do like everything from installing, the wallet to their phones and telling them, all right, so look, see the magic. So I'm going to click a couple of buttons and then you're going to get something what we can call the money because it has value. And you can buy things with it or you can sell it and get fiat currency or whatever, but it's that simple. You just need to do this, this, and this. And the point is that I would say everybody who is open to changes, everybody gets it. Remember when people were first hearing about, again, Google, right? And then it took some time, but now I don't know anybody that would not know what like Googling means, right? It is an official word, in a dictionary. So things change. But how do we do that efficiently? And then how do we do that on a mass scale? I don't know. What I think is that these kind of concepts, they just have to be so deeply integrated into like our day-to-day technology or like, our day-to-day lives, even up to that extent, that you would just not be able to not to participate in it. At some point, speaking about like ride sharing. So same idea, very simple concept. When you're talking to seniors, you guys know what taxis are. You use them a lot. So same idea. The point is that, you can just call a car from your phone. And the only difference, it's not like a, dedicated taxi driver. It is actually somebody that is doing it for part-time. Some people do it full-time, but the majority do it part-time. I would say the concept itself, they can grasp it and they can totally go for it and do it. And actually, I've seen a lot of, people, I would say, way more senior than I am. And then they're way more proficient, about the technology than I am. You have to like feel it on a day-to-day basis.
So it seems like the answer is continuously iterate until something changes, and I mean, I guess you could wait for the clock to run out.
Yes, you're right. I would say iteration is the mother of changes. Ultimately, time is another good answer, right? So once again, I would say that there could be many answers to these questions. And ultimately, the $1 million question is how do we do it, in a fast and efficient way? But, I'd say things are changing way faster than they used to be. I mean, just the amount of changes we experience every day is really like tremendous. And we're not even touching. So, we're covering just one very specific and niche, and it's still a very niche, concept and topic of cryptocurrencies, blockchain. But we're not even touching things are happening in AI or in longevity, health industry, even in construction industry. So there's so many changes on a daily basis. And then I think the more we start talking, about all these different things, the more philosophical you could get in terms of, well, one man wouldn't be able to handle all of that information in their head, but the humanity itself, that's possible, and that's ultimately what's happening. I would not be able to assemble a computer myself, right? But I know how to use it. And, if I need my computer to be fixed, I could bring it to somebody who knows how to do that. Another question here would be is that everybody's saying about the overpopulation of the planet, but maybe we actually need to have more people to be involved in all of these aspects. So that could be another answer to the question.
It's interesting to me if we look at say blockchain. So it seems like there's this romantic notion around blockchain that will supplant the fiat currency that we use right now, which ties into government power and restriction of movement. And I read an article by Dan Jeffries. I don't know if you know that guy. He's on HackerNoon. He was talking about how the government could just come in and basically take everything you had, and they'd be justified in doing so. But if we were to supplant the fiat currency system, it seems like that would remove the power of those structures in a real way. But once we did that, I look at the billions of people on the planet and I realize that, well, there are so many more people who don't even know what blockchain really is all about. So if we actually did make that change, there would be this immediate gap between the haves and the have-nots that's huge, just shifted in a different way.
Yep. I absolutely agree on that. Obviously, whenever we're talking about blockchain, the very first use case that comes in place, and if you look into the majority of the white papers, called the major ones like Bitcoin, Ethereum, you could see that one of the biggest use cases that they describe is financial one. So it's quite natural that we try to think about that first. So in that situation, you'd have to look into the figures. So let's say, according to the World Bank, it was back in 2016, so 2017, but you could still feel the power of the numbers. There are actually close to 2 billion people on the planet. They don't have access to the banking system. They're still using cash. They're still trading with each other. It's just that they're not connecting, on a global scale. It means that they can send money on a distance. And that's just one simple use this case, and then if you apply to many different models out there, one of the biggest one that blockchain people really refer to, which is the Metcalfe's law, that tells you that the power of the system is quadratically correlated to the number of people like involved in it. And then they really, really like to apply to what would happen if we could get those 2 billion people that are right now excluded and just, include them into this like global ecosystem. So what would happen to the economics of each country? What would happen to the economics of those local countries? What would happen to the entire field of the remote jobs? Because there's an entire huge sector of remote jobs that people can do right now, right? With no regards to your location, with no regards to, your physical abilities. There's so many things that you could do, remotely. Those changes, they're frightening. And the reason why is because if you imagine them, you can feel how big they're going to be. And then that's that thrilling feeling. I think that's something that drives a lot of the enthusiasts forward. And that's why many people are really, they want to be a part of this community, because that gives you a feeling of, I'm actually a part of something big, something that is going to change, not just, how we work with each other or how things work, but it will change ultimately your life once and forever. So just like you told, there's a huge turning point from you're not in and you're in. And that's exactly how it's going to feel once, more people start joining in. And it's quite funny referencing the existing non-blockchain but tech companies, how Facebook, how Amazon, how Google are fighting for new users. And ultimately, because they still need to keep growing, and they've got everyone they could get in US, in Europe, in Asia. So they need to actually start growing. And then where's the next biggest kind of chunk of people? And that's ultimately where people are still not included into this global ecosystem. Because once you are, again, there's a whole bunch of new things that you can do. Like very, very dumb example that comes to my mind. Once you have a bank account and you can start paying for things remotely, how many new Netflix subscribers they can get? I mean, everybody watches something. It could be in different languages, it could be different genres, but everybody's watching, some like TV series or movies. So how many more people you can sell, to that thing? And it's not just finance, but finance is going to be the bridge to everyday life.
It seems like you would include people in the consumerism of the capitalist mindset. And then I guess that makes me think about China. And I think about China a lot. I read this book called The 100-Year Marathon. I don't know if you've heard of it. China's plan to replace America as the dominant superpower. And so Mao said in 1949, like, that's what we're going to do in 100 years. It will take us 100 years. We're going to do it. And we're like 70 years in now, So to me, that's an interesting idea where you have a communist country who's coming in and they don't necessarily want capitalism to be the main value system that we live by. And so I'm not suggesting that they're going to come, we'll see boots on the ground anytime soon, but it seems like they're making maneuvers, economic maneuvers. Say they're buying up precious minerals for electric cars, and maybe they'll corner the market there. And maybe I've heard conspiracy theories about climate change being a Chinese red herring, where they're trying to get people to eliminate coal or fossil fuels so that their economies can come up. But it's interesting to me to see the balance of power in that. And so if I take it back to blockchain for a second, China banned it kind of immediately, its use anyway, and then they started working on it. Have you seen anything come out of China in terms of interesting projects that?
So yes and no. And just referencing back on your example, which is actually quite an interesting topic you've mentioned. And here's the reason. The majority of blockchain projects are open source because that's the ground principle of the blockchain community. But here's the thing. The majority of the projects that are being released so that, English is an international language. So in order for everyone to understand your work, everybody tries to publish it in English. And here's the thing. The majority of the projects that are being released and developed in China, they are published in Chinese language. So the majority of tech people from China, they speak English clearly well. And here's the magic difference. Not everybody can speak Chinese, obviously. So the tech people or the tech projects in China, they can consume all of this knowledge available to them in English, but the rest of the world is not being able to consume that knowledge that comes from the projects in China. And that's a very interesting thing. And I think maybe the difference or the changes are not visually or clearly seen right now, but 5-10 years, there's going to be like a huge difference. So quite interesting in, I would say up to year 2018, sometime, mid-time, the majority of projects being released in China, they were mostly to do with gambling or any sort of entertainment project. Would it be sports betting? Would it be anything that in casinos? But after that, I would see a lot of more institutional, like really, really ground-based researches. So most of them are actually to do with the technology on signage. So how you sign the transactions to increase the tolerance, to increase the speed. Basically, there's a lot of the good works there. In terms of the projects, I've definitely seen a few. And actually, there's one, it's a stablecoin project that is developed by the Chinese founders. But it's quite interesting. The founders, they've moved to San Francisco area, so the Bay Area. So they moved from China to the US to actually do the project. So I'm not sure whether, it's something that we've been talking about, but there's definitely something, happening out there. Again, referencing back Libra. So as soon as it was announced, we started also hearing the news that the Chinese government, they said the requirement that they will have to release the new global currency before Facebook. And again, there's no clear or specific information about that, but the rumors are spreading really, really fast, right? So we'll see what's going to be there.
Yeah, that's the only place it goes, really. But okay, but I wouldn't mind changing gears a little bit. You brought up AI, and it makes me think about automation. I read this book called *Sapiens* by Harari. I don't know if you've heard.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And he points out that there will be billions of useless humans once automations kicks in a very real way. What are your thoughts around automation? What's going to happen with that?
It's always been a debate whether, first industrialization and then, automation, whether it's going to create new work, spaces, or whether it's going to, ruin the entire economies of, countries. So up to now, industrialization, once again, and then automation, it's been only creating new workspaces out there. And that's the clear fact. But the thing that nobody's really mentioning on a wide scale is that the workspaces that then it's creating, they're more sophisticated. So they're more like high level jobs. So what I mean, very dumb example, but if you have an assembly line and then you build a robot that would actually work instead of human beings on that assembly line, yes, now you don't need people that would actually work on the assembly line, but now you need engineers that are going to program the robot, build the robot and then maintain the robot. Here's the trick to it, right? In order to maintain the robot or to program the robot, you obviously have to have those, specific skills, which are different, from working on the assembly line. So ultimately, I'm pretty sure that the automation will keep creating new jobs. It's just that the new jobs that it will create, they're going to become like more and more sophisticated. So the question around whether there's going to be billions of useless people, that's a tougher question. That's a tough future that may be. And then I would say that it will only happen if we fail at training or retraining or educating people. So it would become not more of a tech problem, but more of an educational problem.
It's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I look around and I see a lot of people who just wouldn't be able to do that. Be able to do that kind of work, and that's interesting to me. But then I go, well, you're talking about 2 billion people who were unbanked. Is that was the figure?
Yeah. So
and they're unbanked because they just kind of aren't savvy with what's available to them technologically, I would imagine, right? I mean, or at least they can't, not savvy, not that they couldn't do it, but maybe they're just not exposed to it, or they can't have no visibility of it. So, I mean, I guess I don't know. Ultimately, it's like I don't have the answer. That's why I asked the question. So, but
yeah, it's a very, very complicated question, right? There's many different things to it. I would say that if here's the it's more of a consumerism again. The point is that, let's say, once again, I know how to use the computer, I don't know how to build it. Well, why? Well, it's because the guys who first invented it, and then there's years and years of iteration of the development of this entire thing. They made it so simple that even I can use the computer. So maybe the ultimate solution will be, once again, is to make things so easy that people would be able to join in and make that switch. So I'd say there's we're all very different and we're all very same. In a very strange way. So we're all lazy by nature. And then what I mean by that is naturally we tend and lean to the easy paths. So that's how the human being is designed. So in a sense, there's a cost of switching for every human being. So if there's a computer that I know how to use, and then there's a computer that I don't know how to use, so it's built and designed in a completely different way. I would always use the one that that I know how it works, even though the next one could be much better, or it could bring me more money, or it could be easier to use. So I would say us from, like people that are involved in the tech sphere, the ultimate job here is to make sure that things are so easy that everybody, it's, it becomes a no-brainer, or you just have to like switch it. It's like, you remember like CDs. I mean, look, it feels like CDs were like, were yesterday, because I have a laptop, in my house, which has a CD-ROM. But when I try to think about, hold on, it's not when was the last time I used it. It was when was the last time I saw it, right?
Or even thought about it.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't like a while ago. I think like, even 5 years ago, it'd be something, something okay, something normal to be like, all right, here's the CD, it's so, the point here is that how do you make things, easier? There was one really, really good article I read about, and I still remember it was like a couple of years ago, and it was like, what is the future going to be like? So the future of Ethereum. And the answer was like, it was right away given in the title. It's going to be like walletless. So let's say, the entire idea of wallets, this gibberish, hash numbers is very difficult to many people. And I know many people, struggle with just that thing, like something that, let's say, like you may be used to. And just one thing, like, all right, so how do we make, let's say, blockchain more adaptable or like, easy for people? Well, let's make it walletless. Like, how do you do that? That's that's another question. But if it's going to be walletless, there's many more or much more people are definitely going to join in.
For sure. I mean, if it's a simple app on my phone and all I had to do was install it and then type in a bunch of credentials, then we're good to go, basically, right? I mean, I would imagine that's where we're headed. But I guess we'll see. Okay, so maybe we can wrap this up. It's interesting stuff. I like what you're doing in terms of going out there into the world and trying to do good. I mean, as opposed to just having a profit motive. Also, I'm sure the profit motive needs to be in there. It seems to be that's the system that we're doing currently. So, do you have any closing thoughts or final thoughts?
It may be completely different, let's say, spheres, but that's how HackerNoon is also operating. The entire idea of having the content available to everybody and being call it open source, right, and free, and then generating the revenues from the other streams. That's actually the very, very similar and very, very alike concept, and that's why the auditory, right, the core audience of HackerNoon is so maybe not tech oriented, but I would say tech savvy for sure, and tech interested, even more sure than that. And that's why you can see that this concept, right, of fair business, if you can call it this way, is not just, I would say completely or very, very, finance or tech oriented. It could be applied to any, any sphere of our lives. And that's why I think, HackerNoon is doing a great job. And I love you guys and I love what you're doing.
Right on, man. Very, very cool. Well, Anton, it was great talking to you. I appreciate it. It would be great to have you on the show again. Where can people reach you?
So yes, Twitter, I would say that's the major thing. But I tend to actually read more than I write. I don't know. Sometimes I do get this inspiration, like on writing stuff. So not really. There's a website. So it's like mozgovoy.me. But I kind of use it more just to like again link people to, right, if you want to talk, let's schedule a call there so that it's kind of becomes easier. But so I'm not really like looking for self-promotion or anything. So for me it was just like an option. All right, cool, to have HackerNoon, because as I mentioned, that's something like I really, really like and support. And that was quite funny because when you guys first announced your like fundraising round, like on Medium, it wasn't really, really long that I knew the concept. I knew like David, right? Like what was going on there, but jumped in, joined that. So it's it's pretty cool. So for me, it's just like being part of this community. That's what it feels to me.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. It feels like you bring something good to the ecosphere. So
all right,
cool. All right,
yes. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot and have a good day.
Take care. You do the same. Have a great weekend. That was Anton Mozgovoy. You can reach him at mozgovoy.me and on Twitter at mozgovoy_Anton. Please remember to subscribe to us on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on social media. You can find the HackerNoon podcast at podcast.hackernoon.com and keep up with what's going on in the community at community.hackernoon.com. Until the next time, I'm Derek Bernard. Thanks for tuning in. Over and out.